Happy snow day. Thanks everyone for coming. I used to live in Rochester, New York. We used to just call this Wednesday in February. It's a little bit different here in Nashville. So my name is Jason Remenick. I am the CEO and founder of Thalamus. We are a residency and fellowship interview management system looking to help hospitals hire doctors and doctors find the right jobs. Today I'm going to talk about how we are running out of doctors and how data can fix this. So I am a physician by training. I don't practice clinically anymore, but I trained in pediatrics and anesthesiology. And kind of the prologue to our story today is October 2012, New York City, Hurricane Sandy hits. I'm there trying to schedule my residency interviews, and those interviews are canceled, which was kind of the catalyst for what I ended up doing today. And from there, from the sketch on a napkin, we built essentially an open table for residency interview scheduling and an applicant-specific process-specific applicant tracking system for hospitals. And we've had some things that we've had to manage through as a startup, like COVID. We were on the front lines at an emergency medicine conference where 5 people tested positive for COVID very early on, and it made the front page of the Post. And that kind of leads us into our story today. So in 2020, COVID created a world where flights were grounded and surgeries were canceled. It cost a lot of money for each of these industries to recover, and it took a lot of time. And the problem overall was that flights were grounded because there weren't enough pilots, and surgeries were canceled because there weren't enough doctors. And lots of pilots quit flying, and lots of doctors left medicine. And so the big challenge for hospital systems is that anytime a doctor quits practicing medicine due to burnout, it costs the hospital $2.3 million, $250,000 in direct costs to recruit that doctor, and then $2 million in lost clinical revenue over the 6 months hiring that doctor. And the problem's accelerating. We expect a physician shortage of over 100,000 by 2034. It takes 180 days plus. I heard yesterday that some hospital systems are spending 1.5 years trying to find their doctors, depending on the hire. And on average, they're doing 130 physician searches a year. So what that means is each hospital system is spending about $250 million a year on physician turnover. And the best math I can figure out is that's about a $300 billion problem annually that very few of us are talking about. Put another way, it's about 7.5% of the $4 trillion healthcare costs in the US annually. And health systems are having a hard time adapting because physician recruitment still uses legacy technology. A lot of it's done by spreadsheet, Outlook, limited metrics, disjointed data that they're trying to cobble together across their residency programs and across their physician workforce, understanding who trained there, who works there, where those people trained, where they're from, geographically who has a connection. And sourcing and retention becomes very, very hard. And so how do we best match physicians and health systems then? And so I would say that the physicianal educational pathway is key. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, you go from college to medical school, which is undergraduate medical education, and then you apply to residency and potentially fellowship if you subspecialize, which is known as graduate medical education. And this is the pathway you have to go through to practice medicine in the United States in most instances. Where we come in today is the Electronic Residency Application Service, which is run by the Association of American Medical Colleges, or AAMC, runs the application process. The back end of the process is the match, which is run by the National Resident Matching Program, or NRMP, and we fill in the center here as the interview management tool. We're working with over 8,000 residency and fellowship programs at over 800 institutions nationally, following a strategic collaboration that we announced with the AAMC and ERIS in April of 2023. And so what we've learned looking at our data from our workflow tools is that same state is the largest driver of where physicians train and practice. And it's not surprising probably to most of you here that people like to train where they're from. What was interesting to us was how powerful same state was as a predictor in where people train and where they ultimately practice. Looking at Kansas here on the map, if you grow up in Kansas or go to medical school in Kansas, you have the highest likelihood of matching in Kansas. That effect falls off as you move to the neighboring states, the neighbors' neighbors, the neighbors' neighbors' neighbors, and so on and so forth. I grew up in New York. I went to residency in California. I now live here in Nashville, Tennessee. People move all around the country for whatever reason, but same state by far is the largest driver. For instance, here in Nashville, if you're from Tennessee, you have a 51% chance a priori of matching into Tennessee. If you're from outside Tennessee, you only have a 14% chance matching here. And so we repeated this study not only in anesthesiology as shown here, but also in primary care for pediatrics, family medicine, and internal medicine, and the same trends have held overall. And so what does this mean? Why is this important? And a lesson that we learned was how the markets change. And so every matching market every year for graduate medical education is its own unique market. And within that market are submarkets. Each specialty is its own market overall as well. And so the story of emergency medicine in 2022 and 2023 is they had a sudden drop in demand of applicants. At the peak of COVID, people started burning out. It went from the 14th most burned out specialty to the first most burned out specialty. There was a jobs report that came out that said the market was oversaturated, and so demand dropped, particularly in allopathic students who were the most sought after within the specialty. There was also a rapid increase in the supply of the programs. There was over a 600 position increase over a 5-year period from new programs opening. And what it resulted in was 25% of the programs becoming unfilled, predominantly in rural areas. If you all had a list of emergency medicine residency programs in the country, you'd probably be able to pick the ones that went unfilled. The problem was the trend continued the following year, and programs that have very prestigious names and very prestigious programs ended up not filling as well. And so there was these huge swings in supply and demand, and what we learned, not surprisingly, is those programs shown here in the map by applicants where they went to medical school in the purple here and their permanent address over here, the programs that went unfilled in almost every state were predominantly in rural and underserved areas. And so those programs ended up not filling, and the specialty had a lot of positions unfilled overall. Even after the secondary match that occurs, called SOAP, there were still positions unfilled in emergency medicine for the first time ever. And part of the challenge was that there wasn't data to let the residency programs and the applicants know that the market had changed until it was too late. So the paper we wrote with some of the emergency medicine leadership, and essentially for the first time in 2022 and 2023, the purple line is the number of positions offered in the match, and the green line is the number of applicants submitting rank order lists into the match, entering the match to be matched into emergency medicine. And so before the match algorithm, which places everyone, was even run, you had hundreds of positions that were going to go unfilled, and no one knew it, and no one knew the market changed until it was too late. Why this matters even further is what happens in GME and medical school and residency and fellowship affects what happens downstream in the broader physician workforce. When we saw emergency medicine recover, it was at the expense of pediatrics and family medicine having less of a good match the year following, because the international medical graduates and the osteopathic students who predominantly made up more of that specialty ended up pushing themselves into emergency medicine and other reasons across the interdependence of these specialties. But at the end of the day, everything that happens upstream affects what happens downstream. And so this is a study that we did with the California Healthcare Foundation, looking at the representativeness of the physician workforce in California and how it is disparate compared to their population. And so in California, the population is 40% Latino. Only 6% of doctors identify as such, and it's 6% black by population, only 3% of doctors identify as such. And so California Healthcare Foundation asked us why. And so we used our data and other publicly available data, and the really interesting thing was California has the second most medical school spots only to New York in the country, and the first most residency positions. But when you adjust it for its 39 million population, the California drops to 46th and 26th respectively. So it's actually grossly underserved for its population, and as a result, California, from the undergrad to medical school transition, is a mass exporter because there aren't enough spots in California for Californians to go to medical school there, and anyone else who wants to go into California. And then from medical school to residency, because of the relative increase in residency spots, you see some reentry into California. So overall, California is a mass exporter in terms of medical school spots. And so we haven't looked at Texas, Florida, New York, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the other large states, if you follow the Electoral College map, we expect that most of those states are exporters and they go then to other states. And we saw this talking also to many of our colleagues in Mississippi at a Mississippi rural healthcare conference a few years back, where it was the same kind of process, and they told us that, yeah, plenty of people come here from California every year. We try to keep them in Mississippi, but they go back to California. And so that's just one example. But then you look at here in Tennessee, Arkansas, the Dakotas, Idaho, Montana, states where also there are very few residency and medical school positions overall. How do we build that workforce further? And this is just some of the challenges that we see. So how do we fix this? And so GME, as I said, is a really interesting place for us to look. And this is, again, using emergency medicine as an example, the interview distribution of 90% of the market. So the number of applicants receiving interviews is the y-axis, and the x-axis is the number of interviews that those applicants receive. And so as you can see here, there is a large proportion, roughly about a fifth of the applicants into emergency medicine who do not get any interview invites. There are a number of reasons for that. One stratification of this population is that 90% of them are international medical graduates. So that's something to consider as well. But you can also see here is the blue, the orange, and the red show applicants applying to just emergency medicine, applicants applying to more than one specialty, or applicants applying to more than 2 specialties, so 3 or more specialties. And so the amount of cross-application that is happening at the residency recruitment level is showing overall this high cross-specialty interdependence that also shows that not only is each market its own sub-market within each matching market every year, these markets are also interconnected. And what happens at the more competitive specialties, the orthopedic surgeries, the dermatologies, the anesthesiologies, the ophthalmologies, then dictates who ends up becoming the emergency medicine doctors, the pediatricians, the family medicine doctors, and so on and so forth. And there's, of course, people that cross over both ways, and there are people who wanted to be pediatricians who end up becoming orthopedic surgeons as well. And so this happens so much that there's actually a matrix for it that's presented on from the AAMC every single year, and I point out emergency medicine here. And so we're trying to measure markets overall. This is just the GME market. Then, of course, you can go downstream and measure the physician market overall, whereas of a few years ago, there was an oversupply of emergency medicine physicians. So the way to address all of this is to look at it longitudinally, essentially from medical school or before, all the way through residency and fellowship. The other piece behind all of this is the federal government spends $16 billion a year through Medicare to incentivize hospitals to train residents. And even with that being the case, hospitals have a tremendous challenge with sourcing who has a geographic connection to the area, and whether it's the Bay Area of California, here in Nashville, or rural Tennessee, or inner city Boston, every single hospital system in the country is trying to figure out how do we recruit doctors that have a geographic connection to us, including in the rural areas where we know from our own research that, and not surprisingly, doctors who grow up in rural or in underserved communities are more likely to practice in rural and underserved communities because they go home, or that's what home feels like to them. And so in GME itself, how competitive specialties are in the match determine the likelihood of new GME positions being filled. So we need to expand the physician workforce. We need more residency spots. There's been no real increase in the number of residency spots since essentially the 1980s, other than the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, where Congress approved 1,000 additional spots, 200 per year over a 5-year period. They're up to their 3rd or 4th tranche right now of allocating those spots. But there was no language as to what specialties they should go to. And so also, we don't even know what specialties they should go to because we haven't been able to longitudinally track a lot of this. And as I like to say, you could put a dermatology position on the moon and it would fill every year because of reimbursement, lifestyle, how competitive the specialty is. But if you want to put a family medicine position somewhere, an emergency medicine position somewhere, you really have to focus and understand what do the market dynamics look like overall. And so all of that eventually comes downstream with how competitive the job markets are and other factors determine compensation and other factors that affect GME. So there is this interdependence also, obviously, across this entire continuum. And then the other key piece is Hospitals also struggle, and health systems struggle with retaining their residents in the way that Major League Baseball team wouldn't know that they have a future Cy Young award-winning pitcher in their farm system. Hospitals sometimes don't know that they have a great surgeon there, and they're looking to find ways to make those connections with people who are already in their training programs or were in their training programs and left. Their alumni are also hard to track. And so how this all works together is we need to build more objective metrics than the health professional shortage area, or HPSA score. That's right now what Congress is using to allocate these additional GME financing. And that will allow us to build the representative workforce that the US healthcare system needs. And so real-time dashboards across the continuum, through collaboration, through partnership, both government, private, nonprofit, need to happen to ensure that we can measure these rapidly occurring supply and demand changes within and across each specialty. And so longitudinal data is desperately needed so that we can better measure the physician workforce to understand the likelihood that if a GME position is funded, what is the likelihood that it will be filled? If that position that is then filled, will it produce a fully trained physician? Will they finish that training program? And then finally, that the resulting physician will remain in that area to practice. And that's how we solve a lot of these challenges. And so to me, the future of GME recruitment and the future of physician recruitment is using technology, AI, machine learning, behavioral economics data, behavioral psychology data, understanding why someone applies for residency and then interviews at Stanford versus UCSF, or Vanderbilt versus Florida, or Columbia versus NYU, and ultimately where they've matched. You take that along with where they're from, their interests, their geography, the clinical populations that they want to serve, the culture of patients that they want to serve, the area where they want to live, their aspirations, if they get married, or find a partner, where that partner's family is, where their grandparents are, where they're going to have a network to take care of their children, where they're going to have the schools that they're looking for. And you put all of this together, and better measurement of this and better awareness allows that better match between doctor and health system. And then you can build on space magic, AI, and every other thing to understand more of what's going on within these physicians as they apply to these programs, the essays of why they want to be a doctor, how they talk about rurality and underserved populations, how they talk about why they wanted to be a physician. All of these hints and clues and sentiment analysis and thematic analysis and topic analysis can we then better match and say, hey, you're a healthcare system in Florida? Well, we got someone in Oregon who's actually from St. Augustine. You don't know that yet, but we can help make that connection. And so it all comes down to helping medical schools, training programs, and health systems find physicians, and helping physicians find med schools, training programs, and careers at health systems through data. So, yeah, we are doing this because we're Thalamus and we're connecting the dots. Please come see us at VIASC 2511, and really appreciate everyone making it here early this morning with the half-inch snow that's outside. So thanks so much, and have a great rest of the conference and safe travels home.